When we grow old, all we ever wish for is a quiet, peaceful life. But I've had to keep my mind sharp every single day just to survive. Because my daughter-in-law turned my once peaceful home into a battlefield and turned me into a weary, unwilling soldier fighting alone. Are you curious to see how I fought back? If you are, stay with me in today's video. But first, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video to support me. I sat at the Thanksgiving table and tried to steady my breathing. My name is Aurora Howell, a retired chef who once trusted her instincts more than any cookbook, and those instincts were screaming the moment Sophia Grant placed the steaming bowl of pumpkin soup in front of me. She slid it toward me with a strange smile. Her eyes were cold in a way that made the room feel smaller. She murmured that she had cooked it herself. She never stepped into a kitchen. Even during holidays, she hovered over everyone else as if the smell of food might stain her clothes. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second sign hit my nose. A faint, bitter scent rose through the pumpkin and cream. It was a smell I recognized from my years in restaurants, hovering between medicine and herbs that should never be near a heart patient. I kept my expression calm. My hands did not shake, even though my pulse thudded against my throat. I let my spoon hover above the surface of the soup, as if I were admiring it, then gently pushed my bowl aside and switched it with the one in front of her father, Samuel Grant. He was distracted by his phone and did not notice a thing. I had watched him for years, a quiet man who endured his daughter's temper and his son's ambition. He trusted too easily. I wondered if that was why my instinct pushed me toward him in that moment. The room buzzed with conversation. Someone laughed at the far end of the table. The smell of roasted turkey drifted through the air. No one paid attention when Samuel raised the spoon and tasted the soup. I did not breathe. My chest tightened. Then his body jerked as if someone had pulled an invisible wire inside him. His spoon clattered against the table. His eyes rolled back. His head hit the wood with a heavy sound. Chairs screeched and people jumped to their feet. A scream burst from somewhere behind me. My heart dropped into a deep, cold place I knew too well from nights working emergency shifts in restaurant kitchens, but this was different. This was deliberate. This was meant for me. Sophia spun toward me, her face twisted with fury. She pointed at me as if her finger were a knife. She shouted that I was an old hag and demanded to know what I had done. Her voice cracked high enough to rattle the glasses on the table. I sat frozen for a moment, not because I was afraid, but because the truth settled on me with crushing clarity. Someone had planned to poison me at my own Thanksgiving table. Someone who pretended to be family. Someone whose smile had always been a shade too sharp. And now the entire room looked at me. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, the silence in my small house felt heavy at first, but it slowly turned into a gentle kind of peace. I lived alone in the quiet suburb he had chosen for us long ago, a place where the trees rustled softly at night and the mailman always waved when he passed my gate. The house was entirely mine. My husband had been careful with documents and finances, and every paper was in my name. There were no loans, no debts, nothing hanging over my head. Sometimes I would sit on the porch and think about how he wanted me to be safe, and that thought became a kind of anchor for me during lonely mornings. I filled my days with the one thing that always brought me calm: baking. I had spent decades as a pastry chef in an upscale restaurant before I retired, and even though those long nights in a heated kitchen were behind me, the feel of warm dough and the scent of cinnamon never left my hands. Every weekend, I opened a small baking class for the children in the neighborhood. They came running with bright eyes and flour on their shirts, and for 2 hours, I felt like my kitchen became a little world of laughter and sugar. Parents thanked me over and over, but I always told them it was the children who gave me energy. Their joy kept my heart from sinking too deep into memories. My neighbors called me kind and patient. They often reminded Gabriel, my son, that he was lucky to have a mother like me. He would blush a little when they said it, but I could feel his pride behind the embarrassment. After my husband died, Gabriel tried to visit often, but life pulled him in many different directions. Still, he always knew that if he walked through my door, he would find a warm oven and a plate of something sweet waiting for him. I kept a habit that no one ever thought much about. I wrote everything in a recipe notebook. It had started as a collection of measurements and baking notes back in my restaurant days, but over time, it became something else. I wrote small observations about people, little reminders about things. I noticed tiny details that helped me remember what my instincts whispered to me. I never thought this notebook would matter beyond my kitchen, yet it would later become the quiet place where I recorded every shift in Sophia Grant, every strange glance, every careless remark she tried to hide behind polite smiles. No one knew I watched her. No one knew I wrote things down. It was simply my habit, my way of understanding the world around me. Back then, I believed my life was calm and safe. I had no idea the peace of my little house would soon be broken, and that the notebook on my counter would become the first shield between me and the danger seated across my Thanksgiving table. My son, Gabriel Howell, married Sophia at a time when I still hoped he would choose someone steady and grounded, someone who wanted a family the way he once said he did. Instead, he brought home a girl who drifted through life like a feather caught in her own reflection. Sophia never held a job, though she often spoke proudly about a degree in something called digital aesthetics. She used the term the way some people use perfume, a light mist meant to impress, but empty once it settled. Whenever Gabriel mentioned work or routine, she lifted her chin and said she was exploring her creative field. What she really explored were spa packages, skincare routines, and yoga classes that cost more than my weekly groceries. She treated luxury as if it were a basic need. Her mornings began with silk robes and matcha. Her afternoons were filled with appointments for facials and hair glossing. Even her evenings revolved around curating the perfect online presence. Every photo had to be filtered, every angle staged, every detail polished, until she looked like someone who lived in a magazine rather than in the small apartment Gabriel worked so hard to afford. Friends and relatives asked the usual question about children. Sophia always gave the same rehearsed answer. She said she wanted freedom, and that motherhood did not match her aesthetic. She said it with a casual smile, as if life itself were nothing more than a mood board she rearranged whenever she felt bored. The way she separated responsibility from beauty unsettled me. I had raised Gabriel to value effort and family, yet here he was nodding at every word she said as if she were speaking poetry. Gabriel loved her blindly. I watched the way he softened whenever she complained how he defended her, even when her actions made no sense. When neighbors hinted that Sophia might want to contribute financially, Gabriel waved it off. He said she was finding herself. When she spent hundreds on creams and posed in the yard for a perfect shot while he mowed the lawn in the heat, he smiled as if this imbalance were normal. It was strange watching my son bend himself into shapes meant to fit her expectations. He had always been kind, but now that kindness turned into something sharper, something that worried me. He refused to see that marriage was becoming a stage, and Sophia controlled the spotlight. I tried to stay patient. I tried to remind myself that young couples find their rhythm. But each time Gabriel repeated that she just needed space to discover who she was, a quiet disappointment settled in my chest. I wondered how long he could carry the weight alone. I wondered if he even noticed how little she gave back. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a small, uneasy tug that told me the peace in our family was more fragile than anyone realized. Sophia did not work a single day, yet she always knew how to press the softest places in people and make them bend. It began when she announced that her rental apartment was stressing her. She said the lighting hurt her mood, and the neighborhood drained her energy. She said environmental factors affected mental health, and that living near me would heal her. She touched her chest every time she said the word heal, as if she were the one carrying years of loss and responsibility instead of me. Gabriel believed every word. I watched the way his shoulders lifted with hope when she insisted that moving in with me would make her calmer and more focused. I knew he wanted peace. I also knew Sophia wanted convenience. When they arrived at my door with boxes, she walked in first as if she already owned the hallway. She moved quickly, arranging blankets, placing her supplements on the counter, opening my windows without asking. Within a week, she convinced Gabriel to redirect his paycheck into a joint account. I did not understand what made him agree so easily until I learned that only Sophia had a card to access it. She said it helped her manage finances more efficiently. She said every household needed one person in charge. She smiled when she said it, and that smile made the back of my neck tighten. Once she settled in, she extended her reach into parts of my life that had been untouched for decades. She began to oversee grocery money. She told me she would handle the bills for electricity and water because she wanted to support me. Support was her favorite word. Each time she said it, she sounded generous, yet somehow I ended up feeling smaller. One afternoon, she even commented on the cost of the flour I bought for my baking class. She said she should manage that too because she understood budgeting. I kept my calm, but a quiet knot formed in my stomach. My kitchen had always been the one place where I breathed freely. Now I felt watched, even when I sprinkled sugar on a tray. Her suggestions grew bolder as time passed. During one quiet morning, she approached me while I folded laundry. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. She spoke about the difficulties of aging. She talked about sudden health issues. Then she gently mentioned that granting her power of attorney would make future emergencies easier. She said it would allow her to care for me responsibly if something happened. I felt a coldness climb through my ribs. She had been in my home less than 2 months, and already she spoke as if she were planning for the moment I could not speak for myself. I nodded politely, but inside, every instinct sharpened. I had lived long enough to know when someone wanted control disguised as kindness. From that day on, I watched her more carefully. I hid my notebook each night, and I realized the peace of my home was slipping little by little under the weight of her careful hands. Sophia's greed did not arrive all at once. It crept in the way a draft slips under a closed door, quiet at first, then sharp enough to chill the entire house. She began bringing home glossy brochures from beauty companies I had never heard of. She laid them out on my dining table like sacred documents. Each page promised organic purity, rare herbal extracts, and an internal investment opportunity that she claimed would triple in value. She said the return could reach 300%. She spoke with the excitement of someone who had discovered a miracle, but her eyes kept drifting toward my house deed on the bookshelf. She insisted that a small mortgage would unlock incredible wealth for all of us. She said it sweetly, calling it a family venture, a step toward our shared future. I listened, calmly closed the brochure, and told her I would not mortgage the home my husband had worked his whole life to give me. Her smile froze at the edges. Not long after that, she tried a different angle. She mentioned a lawyer friend who supposedly specialized in estate planning. She said wills should be updated at every stage of life. She said names should be adjusted to reflect meaningful relationships. Her tone was soft, but the message was clear. She wanted me to rewrite my will and put her in it. The way she said meaningful made something inside my chest tighten. I told her my will already expressed my wishes, and I did not intend to change them. She looked at me as if I had insulted her, yet beneath the offense I saw something darker, a calculation she thought she had hidden. When I refused to mortgage the house, she broke into tears right in front of Gabriel. She clutched his arm and sobbed that I was stingy and did not trust my own family. She said I was blocking their chance to build a better future. I watched my son's face shift as her words wrapped around him. Doubt flickered in his eyes. He wanted to believe her intentions were pure, and that desire made him vulnerable. I stood still, letting the storm pass, but inside I felt a crack open. I had never seen Gabriel so torn, caught between his mother's caution and his wife's theatrics. The moment that changed everything happened on an ordinary afternoon. We were arguing quietly in the hallway. She accused me of holding on to old values. I told her I valued survival, not fantasies. Then as she turned away, thinking I had stepped back into the kitchen, I heard her whisper under her breath. She said the old woman has lived too long. She said it with the softness of someone commenting on the weather. The words did not rise. They sank. They slid under my skin and stayed there. In that instant, I felt something I had not felt in years, a cold warning rising up through my bones. For the first time, I realized I was not simply dealing with a selfish daughter-in-law. I was standing in the path of someone who saw my life as an obstacle. From that moment on, I understood danger had entered my home. 1 month before Thanksgiving, the first real crack in their marriage appeared. Gabriel stood in my kitchen with his phone in his hand and his face drained of color. He had called the bank because something in his savings account looked strange. By the time he hung up, his hands were shaking. The account was empty. Every last dollar was gone. The bank told him there had been 12 withdrawals, each one carefully kept, just under the limit that would require verification. That pattern alone told me the withdrawals had been planned. Whoever took the money knew exactly how to stay below suspicion. I did not say her name. I did not need to. The silence between us said enough. Later that evening, Sophia burst into the living room with swollen eyes and trembling hands. She said she had been scammed by a cosmetic business partner. She said it was all her fault. She said she never meant to risk their savings. But her story bent at the wrong angles. The emails she showed Gabriel were clumsy, filled with errors, missing contracts, missing signatures. The company names were inconsistent. Even Gabriel, blinded by love for so long, began to see that something was off. I watched him read through the papers again and again, his lips pressed tight. For the first time, I saw doubt settle on his shoulders, like a heavy coat. That night, as I passed the hallway, I heard Sophia's voice through the bathroom door. She was whispering frantically into her phone. She said if she could not get my house, she would be finished. She said she had nothing left to cover the loss. She said someone was pressuring her. Her voice cracked into panic. I stood there with a cold weight inside my chest. She was not only greedy, she was desperate. A desperate person with a motive was something far more dangerous than a selfish one. After that call, her behavior changed quickly. She began watching me more closely. She hovered around the kitchen as if she needed to know where everything was. She shifted her tone from sugary to sharp, depending on whether Gabriel was present. I caught her once looking through my medicine cabinet. She shut it quickly and said she was checking for expired pills. I pretended not to notice. Pretending was easier than revealing that my instincts were roaring. What I did not know at the time was that Sophia had started researching things on her laptop late at night. Later, investigators would tell me she had typed heart failure symptoms in elderly women, causes of fainting in high-stress situations, herbal mixtures that induce dizziness, how to create a staged medical emergency. She had bookmarked them. She had sorted them into folders. It was the most chilling detail. She was not acting out of impulse. She was planning. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Gabriel withdrawing into silence. Sophia pacing rooms when she thought no one watched. The tension in the air thickening like smoke before a fire. I could feel something approaching, something dark and deliberate. I just did not know yet that the Thanksgiving table would be the place where her plan unfolded. The weeks leading toward Thanksgiving felt like watching a storm build behind a closed window. Each day, the air in my house grew heavier. That was when I began noticing how often Sophia slipped into the kitchen to make quiet phone calls. She always waited for the moment I stepped outside to water the backyard plants. She knew it was part of my routine. She also knew the running hose would mask her voice. The timing was too perfect to be accidental. I would return through the side door and hear her whispering. Her back turned, her shoulders tense. When she heard my footsteps, she would stop speaking so fast, it was as if a switch had been flipped. One afternoon, I came in earlier than usual. The window was open and the breeze carried fragments of her conversation. I heard the words, heart racing and dizziness and delay. The way she pronounced them was not casual. They were technical. She sounded as if she were repeating instructions rather than chatting. I knew enough from my years in restaurant kitchens to recognize medical vocabulary when I heard it. Someone on the other end was advising her. Someone who knew how certain substances affected the body. For a moment, I stood still in the doorway and felt a cold thread of fear wind its way up my spine. After that day, I paid closer attention. Sophia started checking her watch more often. Sometimes she would look at the digital clock on the microwave as if counting. I heard her mutter under her breath that everything had to line up with dinner. She said it with a focus that did not belong to a simple household chore. It belonged to a schedule, a plan, something with a beginning and a consequence. Her behavior around the kitchen became more peculiar too. She hovered around the spice rack. She opened the cabinet where I kept herbs and closed it again without taking anything. She watched the oven preheat even when I was not baking. Each action felt like she was studying the space, learning its rhythms. There were moments when I stepped into the kitchen without warning. Each time she almost jumped. She would slam her phone screen dark and force a bright smile. Then she would pretend she was browsing recipes. The lie was so thin, it almost made the floorboards echo. Sophia never cooked. She had made that clear from the day she married Gabriel. Watching her pretend to research casseroles and soups felt like watching a child hide a stolen cookie behind her back. As the pattern continued, small details began to connect in my mind. The whispered calls, the medical language, the fixation on timing, the false interest in cooking. I could feel pieces sliding into place around me, forming a shadow of something intentional and dangerous. Each day, I felt the house tighten with tension. Even my baking class lost its calm. I found myself checking behind me while kneading dough. I began taking my notebook everywhere again, writing down every strange detail. By then, I knew something was coming. Sophia was not impulsive anymore. She was preparing. She was watching the clock. And she was waiting for a very specific moment to strike. I had no intention of snooping, but danger has a scent, and my instinct was sharper than ever. One afternoon, I opened the hallway cabinet to grab fresh linens and noticed the corner of a small container tucked behind Sophia's skincare bottles. It was a simple white jar, but something about it felt wrong. When I pulled it out, the label hit me like a cold splash. It read, Heart Vitality Booster. I recognized the name immediately. Months earlier, I had read an article warning consumers that this powdered supplement had been flagged by the FDA for containing undeclared cardiac stimulants. They marketed it as natural herbal support, but tests showed it could disrupt heart rhythm if used in the wrong dose. The thought of it being in my house made my breath stall. The jar looked new at first glance, the seal still intact across the lid. But along the side was a faint streak of orange-yellow powder, almost like pollen clinging to a petal. That single mark told me the jar had already been opened and taped shut again. Someone had tried to make it look unused. I held it closer and caught a whiff of the sharp herbal scent, bitter and metallic under the sweetness. I had worked with enough spices and extracts in restaurant kitchens to know how flavors behaved. I knew pumpkin's natural sweetness could hide almost anything if mixed gently. A powder like this could blend into a soup without leaving a trace. My chest tightened as the pieces clicked together. Her secret phone calls, the timing tied to dinner, the obsession with symptoms, and now a stimulant hidden among face creams and serums. It all aligned too perfectly. Still, I forced myself to stay calm. I placed the jar back exactly where it had been. Later that evening, I approached her in a gentle tone. I said I had noticed a new supplement and asked if she had picked it up for her health. Her reaction was too fast, too defensive. She said she used it for weight loss. She said it casually, almost dismissively. But that was the wrong answer. This powder had nothing to do with losing weight. It was never marketed that way. She did not even bother to invent a convincing excuse. That was when certainty settled inside me like a heavy stone. She was lying. She was hiding her intentions. And she was careless enough to think I would not know. After that conversation, I carried a quiet tension in my stomach, the kind that lingers when truth starts to come into focus. The more I watched her, the more her movements looked deliberate. She hovered near the kitchen during meals. She checked the soup pot even when it was not hers to touch. And she kept glancing at me with an expression I knew too well from dealing with difficult customers in my restaurant days. It was the look of someone calculating an outcome. I told myself I needed evidence. I told myself I needed patience. But deep down, I already understood the direction everything was headed. The jar in her cabinet was not just a supplement. It was a signal. It was the first clear sign that Thanksgiving dinner was never meant to be a family gathering. It was meant to be a moment she controlled. Sophia's transformation happened so suddenly that it felt unnatural, like watching an actress switch costumes in the middle of a scene. For 3 years, she had lived in my house without lifting a finger in the kitchen. She always said cooking was draining or that certain smells disturbed her energy. Yet almost overnight, she became eager and cheerful, appearing beside me with a new apron folded neatly in her hands. She said she wanted to learn how to cook for me. Her voice carried a sweetness that did not match the expression in her eyes. I knew she was performing carefully, building an image to soothe Gabriel and impress the neighbors, who often complimented my meals. She began posting stories online of herself chopping vegetables, though half the time the cutting board looked untouched. She smiled wide into her camera and wrote captions about learning to make soup for her dear mother-in-law. She played the part so well that even strangers might have believed she had always been thoughtful and attentive. But I knew better. I had lived with her long enough to recognize when her charm was a costume. Sophia started calling me Mom with a honeyed tone that rolled too smoothly to be genuine. Before this, she rarely addressed me at all unless she needed something. Most days, she walked past me without a greeting, leaving laundry grocery lists and small responsibilities scattered behind her. Now she hovered near me as if affection had been her nature all along. Each time she called me Mom, I felt a small tightening in my chest. It was the kind of sweetness that came with intent. Her curiosity about my health also grew. One morning, she asked casually about my upcoming checkup. She said she wanted to help manage my schedule. But when I stepped out to prune the garden, I returned to find my folder of medical papers slightly out of place. My cardiology reports were on the top. She had gone through them. The thought settled like a stone in my stomach. She wanted to know the details. She wanted to know my vulnerabilities. I could feel it as clearly as if she had spoken it out loud. It became worse in the following days. She asked if I ever felt lightheaded when standing up. She asked if my vision blurred in the evenings. She asked if my hands shook when I was tired. Her questions came with a smile, but her eyes studied me the way a scientist observes a sample. It was not concern. It was research. She was gathering data, adjusting, calculating. I answered calmly, keeping my voice steady even when my heartbeat was not. I took notes in my recipe book each night, scribbling down every shift in her behavior. The more she played her pleasant role, the more the mask slipped around the edges. Her sudden kindness, her forced warmth, her careful monitoring of my routines, all built toward something I could feel but not yet see. The house felt tighter, like the air itself was listening. By then, I understood she was preparing the final step in whatever plan she had imagined. And her new role as the devoted daughter-in-law was crafted for one purpose: to make sure no one would question her when the moment arrived. I had learned to walk quietly in my own house the way chefs move between stations without making a sound. One evening, as I passed the hallway, I heard Sophia's voice coming from the laundry room. She was speaking low, but not low enough. Her words slipped through the cracked door and froze me where I stood. She said, "The old woman will only have a mild heart episode, not death. We only need a reason to put her in the hospital so we can take over the finances." The calmness in her tone was more chilling than the sentence itself. She was not talking about an accident. She was describing an event she expected to control. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. She did not want me gone. Not yet. She wanted me weakened. She wanted a medical crisis that looked natural enough for Gabriel to hand over authority. I had read enough about conservatorships to know how easily they could be misused. If someone is hospitalized long-term, a spouse or family member can petition to manage finances for the patient. She was planning to use my own son as the gateway. The thought pressed into me like a weight I could not lift. Then I heard her mention something she called Phase 2. She said it softly, but clearly. It told me the plan did not end with a controlled illness. There was more. She wanted the house. She wanted everything my husband left behind. If she could get me into a hospital bed and keep me there long enough, she believed the rest would fall into her hands. I felt a cold shock spread through my ribs. The future she envisioned for me was not recovery. It was removal. A second voice rose from the other end of the call. It was a man's voice, low and casual, in a way that made my stomach twist. He did not sound like a doctor. He did not sound like anyone trained to help another human being. His tone carried the slick confidence I had heard in scammers who used to wander the restaurant lobby trying to sell fake supplies. He told her to stick to the dosage and to time it right. He said people her age always respond predictably. The familiarity between them suggested this was not their first conversation. I stood there in the dim hallway and listened to the pieces fall into place. Sophia was not acting alone. She had someone guiding her, someone who knew how to hide danger under the mask of herbal health products, someone who believed an elderly woman like me could be manipulated into silence. Hearing them speak about me as if I were an object made the air feel thin around my face. When Sophia ended this call, she walked out humming as if she had just finished discussing weekend plans. I stepped back into the shadows before she could see me. My pulse thudded steady and strong in my ears. I knew now that what she intended for Thanksgiving was not a spontaneous act. It was part of a structure, a sequence, a plan with steps and calculations. From that night on, I slept lightly. I kept a lamp on, and I knew I could rely only on my instincts because the danger living under my roof had revealed its true shape at last. I chose silence because silence has power. I moved through the house with the same calm rhythm I had followed for years. I baked, swept the porch, folded laundry, and watered the rosemary by the window. I kept my hands steady and my face soft. Sophia watched me while pretending not to. Her eyes tracked every step I took, but I gave her nothing. She needed to believe I was still harmless, still unaware, still inside the little circle of control she thought she had drawn around me. So I hummed old recipes under my breath and let her think I was drifting through my days like any tired elderly woman. Inside, I was wide awake. Each time she left a room, I opened my recipe book and wrote down what I saw and heard. I listed times, words, smells, the way she checked the clock, the way she stood too close to the stove, the sudden sweetness in her tone. I wrote it all as if I were documenting a new dessert formula. By the end of the week, the pages formed a timeline. If anything happened to me, no matter how small, someone would be able to read the truth I left behind. One quiet afternoon, I called attorney Clayton Ross. I kept my voice mild, like a breeze passing through an open window. I told him only that if anything unusual occurred, he should keep his phone nearby. I did not explain further. He knew me well enough to understand when my tone carried warning beneath calmness. He paused for a moment, then said he would be ready. I ended the call and placed the phone beside the flower jar. After that, I began preparing the only kind of defense someone like me could manage, a quiet one. I washed a small glass jar and placed it in a drawer where I could reach it quickly. I tested the mini camera my neighbor's grandson had given me last spring. It was no bigger than a coin and slipped easily behind the row of cookbooks on the counter. I checked the angle twice until I could see the entire stove area reflected on my phone screen. Then I studied the kitchen the way I used to study a new menu layout. I found a way to lift a lid, stir a pot, or switch a bowl without drawing attention. I practiced moving slowly, gently, as if my hands were simply checking seasoning. Sophia believed I was old and predictable. That belief would let me get close to anything she tried to prepare. Each gesture I made during those days looked ordinary. A spoon stir, a towel folded, a jar moved half an inch. But beneath those motions lived the quiet readiness of someone waiting for a storm to break. I did not confront her. I did not warn Gabriel. I let the house stay calm on the surface because calmness was the only shield I had. And as I laid out my silent plan, one truth settled firmly in my chest. Thanksgiving was coming, and Sophia was almost ready. So was I. The afternoon before Thanksgiving, the house felt strangely still. Gabriel was out running an errand, and Sophia was upstairs doing whatever performance she had prepared for the holiday. I moved quietly into the kitchen, following the ache in my chest that had been warning me for days. On the stove sat the pot of pumpkin soup she had insisted on making for the family dinner. The lid was still warm. Something about the way the steam drifted from the edges made my skin tighten. I reached out and lifted the lid. A wave of heat rose, carrying with it a faint, bitter scent that did not belong in any pumpkin recipe I had ever known. It was sharp, almost metallic, under the sweetness. I recognized it instantly. Years ago, when experimenting with herbal infusions for desserts, I had smelled that same sting. It came from stimulants disguised as natural extracts, the kind of ingredient that required precision and caution. That smell had no place in a holiday dish meant for family. I leaned closer. The soup's color was too dense. Real pumpkin soup has a bright, warm tone. It reflects light. This batch looked heavy, almost muddy, as if something darker had been stirred into it. The surface shimmered unnaturally, and the texture seemed thicker than it should. I felt my pulse settle into a slow, steady beat. confirmation often arrives first as silence. I took a spoon and dipped it toward the bottom. As I moved it gently through the mixture, I noticed faint streaks of powder clinging to the metal. The granules were tiny, barely noticeable, a shade of orange-yellow, nearly identical to pureed pumpkin. A perfect disguise for someone who understood how color and texture could hide a foreign substance. Sophia was careless enough to think I would never see these details, but careless people always leave traces. I stirred again and watched the powder dissolve completely on the spoon. That meant she had added it at least an hour earlier, maybe two. Right around the time I had stepped out to buy more butter, leaving her alone in the kitchen. She had waited for that window. She had planned that moment. My throat tightened with something between dread and clarity. The soup was no longer just soup. It was evidence. Evidence of timing, of opportunity, of preparation. Each detail aligned with the notes in my recipe book. The phone calls, the herbal powder, the obsession with symptoms, the forced sweetness. And now the contaminated pot sitting quietly on my stove. I set the lid back, careful not to disturb anything else. I wiped the spoon clean and placed it exactly where it had been. The kitchen looked untouched again, but I was no longer the same woman who walked into it 10 minutes earlier. Inside me, something sharp and cold had settled into place. It was the feeling I had known in every dangerous kitchen moment of my career, the moment when instinct whispers that disaster is not coming. It is already here. I stepped out to the back porch where the air felt easier to breathe and dialed Clayton Ross. He had handled my house paperwork years ago and had always spoken to me with a mixture of respect and quiet caution, the kind a person uses when they know danger hides in ordinary places. When he answered, I kept my voice low. I told him there was something wrong with the soup Sophia had made. I did not describe everything, only enough for him to understand the urgency. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me to stay calm and to remember that evidence mattered more than fear. Clayton warned me not to touch the soup again. He said even stirring too much could change the chemical structure of whatever substance was inside. If the situation escalated and an investigation was needed, the sample had to remain intact. The way he said intact made my stomach tighten. He reminded me that food suspected of contamination could be sealed and sent to a medical examiner's lab. It was part of state law, he said, and it gave victims a chance to protect themselves when intent was unclear. I nodded, even though he could not see me. He told me to take photographs immediately, not just of the pot, but of the stove, the clock on the wall, the lighting, anything that could prove timing later. He said to capture the color and the texture exactly as they were. He also advised me to record any conversation that hinted at ingredients timing or preparation. His voice was steady, almost gentle, but every instruction felt like stepping closer to a truth I had been trying not to name. I walked back into the kitchen with the phone still pressed to my ear and looked at the pot again. I photographed it from every angle. I held the camera close enough to catch the thickness of the surface and the faint streak of powder clinging along the side of the ladle rest. Clayton told me to save the photos in 2 places. He told me not to delete anything, not even blurry shots. Evidence builds quietly, he said. It rarely arrives in a single moment. Before ending the call, he lowered his voice. He told me that if I truly believed a harmful substance had been added, I needed to be ready to report it the moment anything happened. He said not to confront Sophia directly, not to challenge her alone. His final words settled heavily in my chest. He said, "Do not stand against this by yourself." I thanked him and set the phone down on the counter. The kitchen looked ordinary again, warm light falling across the cabinets, the faint scent of cinnamon still lingering from the batch of muffins I had baked that morning. But the pot on the stove felt like a silent warning. Clayton's advice echoed in my mind as I wiped my hands on my apron. Stay calm, observe, document, and be ready. The evening ahead felt like a door beginning to open. I waited until the house felt still the way a kitchen settles after the dinner rush. Sophia was upstairs humming loudly enough to convince herself she was relaxed, and that gave me the window I needed. I reached into the drawer where I kept my canning supplies and took out a small glass jar. It was one of the jars I always sterilized for jam, cleaned with boiling water and dried in the open air. A clean container was essential. Any trace of outside residue could interfere with a chemical test, and I needed the sample to speak clearly if the time came. I lifted the lid of the soup pot with the same gentle motion I used when checking a custard that might collapse under sudden air. The steam rose again, carrying that bitter scent I already knew too well. I dipped a small ladle into the pot and poured a shallow amount into the jar. I moved carefully, making sure the surface of the soup in the pot looked untouched. My hands felt steady, almost too steady for someone collecting evidence against her own daughter-in-law. But chefs learn early in life that precision is a kind of survival. When the jar was filled to the right level, I sealed the lid tight and wrote the date and exact time across the top with a marker. Time stamps matter. Investigators always look at when a substance was taken, how long it sat, what chain of custody it followed. My kitchen had become a small laboratory without anyone knowing. I held the jar for a moment, feeling its warmth seep through the glass. It felt like holding a quiet truth. I chose the safest hiding place I had. I opened the large drawer under my baking tools. The drawer where I kept pastry brushes, spare piping bags, silicone molds, and the old rolling pin Gabriel made for me when he was 12. Sophia had never touched this drawer. She avoided my baking supplies the way some people avoid cold water. I placed the jar between two containers of flour dusters tucked just far enough back that no one would see it unless they knew exactly where to reach. Before leaving the kitchen, I recreated every detail I had disturbed. I smoothed the surface of the soup with the ladle. I wiped the rim of the pot. I adjusted the lid so it sat at the same slight angle Sophia had left it. Every inch mattered. If she suspected anything too early, she might change her plan. Worse, she might accelerate it. I could feel the air thicken around me as I worked as if the house were aware of the danger settling into its walls. When everything looked untouched, I stepped back and allowed myself one breath. Just one. The jar was hidden. Evidence existed. And the pot remained exactly as she expected it. If Sophia believed her plan was still invisible, she would move forward. And I needed her to move forward in order to catch her. I turned off the kitchen light and walked out calmly, the way I always did, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long moment, letting the truth line itself up in my mind. I kept seeing Samuel Grant in my memory the way he had collapsed at his own birthday celebration the year before. I had been standing only a few feet away that night when his face turned gray and his knees buckled. The paramedics later said he had a conduction disorder in his heart and that he needed medication every single day to keep the rhythm steady. I had never forgotten the sound of the monitor beeping unevenly beside him in the ambulance. It was the sound that returned to me now as I stared at the quiet kitchen. The herbal powder Sophia had chosen was a stimulant that pushed the heart to beat faster. In a healthy person, it caused a rush of heat, dizziness, maybe a sudden loss of balance. But in someone like Samuel, whose heartbeat already struggled to follow its path, it could trigger a dangerous misfire. The kind that sent the rhythm racing into chaos. The kind that sometimes pushed the body into a brief stop before it could recover. I knew this because I had worked with chefs who often used herbal concentrates, and we were required to learn how certain extracts affected the body. My hands felt cold as I remembered those lessons. I understood then that Sophia had measured her plan around me. She believed the substance would only make me faint. She believed it would weaken me, not end me. She expected a controlled crisis, something dramatic enough to send me to the hospital, but not enough to carry the weight of a tragedy. She had looked at me and seen someone sturdy enough to survive the blow, and she had chosen a dose that reflected that assumption. But she had not considered the house she lived in. She had not considered the people around her, because Samuel was fragile in ways she did not understand. His heart was a thin thread. A sudden push from the stimulant could snap it. She did not know that his medication had recently been adjusted. She did not know his doctor had warned him to avoid anything that could accelerate his pulse. She had focused so completely on me that she had overlooked the most vulnerable person in the room. As that realization settled, a terrible understanding rose inside me. Sophia had built her plan on ignorance. She had not intended to kill anyone. But the powder she had chosen, the dose she had mixed, the moment she had timed so carefully, all of it could become fatal for Samuel. The twist was not mine. It was hers. A twist she had never predicted. I pressed both hands to the table and let the weight of it spread through me. If the wrong bowl ended up in front of the wrong person, the night would not unfold the way she imagined. It would break open in a way she could not control. And for the first time, I felt the cold shape of the future shift. Her scheme was dangerous, but the danger did not belong to me alone anymore. It belonged to her as well. I knew there was only one move left that would keep everyone alive and still reveal the truth. Refusing the soup outright would never work. If I pushed the bowl away, Sophia would simply insist I eat, or she would place a different dish in front of me. She was too committed to her plan to let me slip through her fingers. The only way to expose her was to let her trap spring in front of witnesses, but without harming the person she intended to hurt. I sat at the table that evening, already knowing what I would do. The room was full of voices, laughter clinking silverware, the rustle of holiday napkins. Thanksgiving always carried that warm noise that wrapped around a house. I let it build around us like a cover. The more noise there was, the easier it would be for me to move without drawing a single eye. Gabriel was busy passing bread. Sophia was pretending to enjoy a story someone told at the far end of the table. Samuel, as always, waited patiently with his hands folded, the first person who liked to take a small taste before everyone else began eating. That was the moment I needed. I reached for my bowl with the same casual motion I had practiced in my mind a dozen times. My hand did not shake. My breath stayed even. I slid my bowl just an inch to the left, then a little farther, letting the movement blend with the shifting dishes and chatter around me. When Gabriel leaned forward to refill a glass, the tablecloth rippled slightly, and that was the cover I had been waiting for. In one smooth motion, I exchanged my bowl with Samuel's, the shift so gentle it looked like nothing more than making space on a crowded table. I did not do it to harm him. I did it because I knew he always took only one cautious spoonful at the start. One small taste would be enough to trigger symptoms, not enough to cause catastrophic damage. And those symptoms appearing sharply and suddenly, in front of a full table of relatives, would force the truth into the open. It would ruin any chance Sophia had of directing blame toward anyone else. It would expose her timing, her preparation, and the substance she had slipped into the soup. The room itself would become the witness she could not manipulate. As I set the bowl before Samuel, I felt the air shift inside me, not with fear, but with certainty. My goal was not revenge. My goal was proof. Proof strong enough that no lie could cover it. Proof undeniable enough that Gabriel would finally see the reality he had tried so hard to ignore. Proof that Sophia had crossed a line no one in our family could defend. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. The table glowed with warm light. The chatter continued. And next to me, Samuel lifted his spoon, unaware that he was about to become the turning point in a plan much bigger than any of us had imagined. I breathed in slowly. The moment was coming, and I had guided it into place without hurting a soul. The moment Samuel's spoon touched his lips, the shift in the room was immediate. His face drained of color. His shoulders jerked, and he slumped forward with a sound that cracked through the warmth of the Thanksgiving table. Chairs scraped. Silverware clattered. A wave of panic rose around us. Before anyone had time to understand what was happening, Sophia launched herself toward him with a scream so sharp it cut the air. She knelt beside him, clutching his arm, her voice trembling in all the right places. She shouted, "Dad, what is happening? Are you okay?" But even as she cried, her hand shot out and pointed straight at me. Her finger did not waver. It was the only steady thing about her. In the middle of her shrieking, she kept directing the entire room's attention toward me like someone staging a performance that needed a villain. I stood still, letting the chaos swirl my heart steady as a drum. I knew exactly what she was doing. Then her voice rose louder. She told everyone she saw me switch the bowls that I had done it on purpose. She said it fast, too fast, as if she had rehearsed the script. The lie rolled off her tongue like something she'd practiced in private. My relatives looked toward me in shock, their eyes wide with confusion. They did not know the truth. They did not know what had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Gabriel rushed to her side, helping steady Samuel. His voice cracked when he said, "You made the soup, though." The question hung in the air with the weight of a stone thrown into still water. For a moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes flickered not with sadness, but calculation. Then she collapsed into a new posture, one of trembling fragility. She whispered that maybe his mother hated her, that perhaps I had done something out of spite. Her voice shook exactly the way a good actress makes her audience lean in. But her eyes were the truth. They darted everywhere. They flicked left, then right, then down, then up again. A person in grief does not look around for exits. A liar does. I watched her closely, the way I once watched a souffle rise, waiting for the slightest tremor that told me everything I needed to know. Around us, the room buzzed with confusion. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. Another rushed to bring water. Chairs moved. The table vibrated under the panic of half a dozen hands. Through it all, Sophia kept shaking, kept crying, kept insisting that she had caught me doing something to the bowl. Each word was a stitch in a net she hoped to wrap around me before anyone could think clearly. But she was unraveling. Her breath came too fast. Her hands kept slipping into gestures that did not match her words. Her face twisted in fear, but underneath it her eyes showed the frantic shine of someone cornered by her own lies. I stayed quiet. Quiet was the strongest weapon in the room, and as the family turned back to Samuel trying to revive him, I knew something important. Sophia had just exposed herself far more than she realized. The room spun with noise, but my voice stayed steady when I reached for the phone. Years of working in a professional kitchen had taught me that panic never saved anyone. I stepped a little away from the table so I could hear myself think and dialed 911 with a calmness that felt almost unnatural in the middle of the chaos. When the operator answered, I gave my name, my address, and the words that mattered most. I said he took one spoonful of soup and collapsed immediately. The operator's tone changed at once. Sudden collapse after eating triggered the emergency protocol for possible food poisoning, and they dispatched a unit without delay. I knelt beside Samuel for a moment, listening to the shallow rasp of his breath, then stepped back so the others could fan him and loosen his collar. The sirens arrived quickly, cutting through the night. When the paramedics rushed in, I explained again that the symptoms began instantly after a single spoonful. They exchanged a look, I recognized the look of professionals who understood what that might mean. One of them reached for the pot to clear space on the counter, but I lifted my hand and told them not to discard anything. I said this soup may be evidence. My voice was level, not emotional, and that made the words heavier. The lead medic paused, then nodded. He called for an evidence seal from his bag, the kind used when a substance might require laboratory testing. Sophia's face went pale when she saw him pull it out. She stammered that it was just normal soup, that we were all overreacting, that nothing was wrong except my attitude. Her voice cracked into a high pitch that drew the eyes of everyone in the room. I asked for a police officer to accompany the paramedics into the kitchen. The request was simple but precise. I wanted a witness to the condition of the soup pot before anyone touched it. I wanted a record that nothing had been removed or washed away. The officer followed me into the kitchen, and I stood back while he photographed the pot, the ladle, the stove, and the surrounding counter. He documented the angle of the lid and the level of soup remaining inside. I could almost feel Sophia's fear rising behind me, like heat from an open oven. She tried to regain control, stepping into the doorway with her hands shaking. She said, "Maybe the soup was too hot. Maybe Samuel choked. Maybe he reacted to spices." But her explanations fell apart as fast as she offered them. Every word tangled with the next. Her eyes darted from the pot to the officer to me, as if searching for a version of reality she could still manipulate. Meanwhile, the medics lifted Samuel onto the stretcher. His breathing was uneven, but present. As they wheeled him toward the door, I felt a heavy tightness ease from my chest. He was alive. That was the anchor I needed. When the officer sealed the pot inside a clear evidence bag, Sophia let out a thin, trembling whisper. She said it was just normal soup. Mother is blowing this out of proportion. But her voice held no conviction. Not even she believed her own words now. I stood still, hands folded, watching as the truth finally began to take shape in the open. When the police arrived, the room fell into a strange quiet, the kind that settles when the truth is about to divide one life from another. I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. My voice was calm, almost steady enough to hide the exhaustion in my bones. I told the officers that I had taken a sample of the soup earlier in the evening before the incident happened, and that I believed the soup contained a harmful substance. The words left my mouth without hesitation. They sounded precise, measured the way I needed them to sound. The officers exchanged a brief look, and I knew they understood the importance of evidence gathered before a crisis. I walked to the drawer where I had hidden the glass jar and removed it with a care that made the room feel smaller. When I placed it in the officer's hand, Sophia let out a soft gasp that caught halfway in her throat. She tried to smile, as if this were all absurd, as if I had simply misunderstood. She said I was paranoid. She said I watched too many crime shows. But her smile was thin and brittle, and her fingers trembled so hard she could not even steady the spoon lying next to her water glass. The metal clinked against the table every time her hand brushed it. The officer twisted the lid off the jar and leaned in slightly. He inhaled just enough to catch the scent. His brow furrowed. He wrote something down in his notebook. He said the smell was not consistent with typical pumpkin soup, and that alone was enough to make the jar a priority sample for the lab. His tone was factual, not accusatory, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that slipped under Sophia's skin. I could see it in the way she pressed her lips together, in the way her shoulders tightened, like a rope pulled too far. Sophia tried to interrupt, saying maybe the jar was contaminated. Maybe I had handled it wrong. Maybe the ingredients were different because she used a new recipe. Each excuse tripped over the last. Her voice rose higher, thinner. She could not control the pitch anymore. Fear does that to a dishonest person. It cracks them open from the edges. I waited for her to finish talking herself into a corner. Then I looked at the officers again and told them there was another item in the house they needed to collect. I explained that I had found a container labeled Heart Vitality Booster in Sophia's cabinet, a powder known for its stimulant effects on the heart. I said it calmly, but the room reacted instantly. Sophia froze. Her face drained so fast it made her look older. She whispered that it was just for weight loss, just a harmless supplement, nothing serious. But her voice wobbled like a string pulled too tight. The officers asked her to show them the cabinet. She hesitated a moment too long. That hesitation spoke louder than any confession. When she finally led them to the kitchen, her steps were small and uneven. She opened the cabinet with shaking hands. The jar was still there, the same orange-tinted powder clinging to the rim where she had wiped it carelessly. The officers removed it, sealed it, and logged it as evidence. Sophia stood beside them, trying to keep her expression neutral, but her eyes told the truth. Her mouth could not hide. She knew the walls were closing in. She knew the story she had rehearsed was slipping out of her grip. And she knew for the first time that night that the danger she tried to aim at me had already begun to turn back toward her. Clayton arrived just after 9, the hour when most houses on our street were settling into quiet. But the moment he stepped through my door, I knew he wasn't here for reassurance. He carried a folder tucked under his arm, thick enough to bend slightly at the edges. His face held the calm of someone who had spent all day preparing for a storm no one else had noticed yet. I guided him into the living room, where the faint smell of cinnamon still lingered from the muffins I had baked that morning. He sat down, opened the folder, and the truth spilled out between us. The first papers he placed on the table were bank statements, clean copies, clear dates, 12 withdrawals, each one at the maximum limit just below the threshold that triggered automatic verification, all carried out from the same device. Clayton tapped the page with his finger. "This is Sophia's phone." He said it with the certainty of a man who had checked every digital footprint twice. The pattern was unmistakable. Each withdrawal landed in the same secondary account, then disappeared. Gabriel had not authorized a single one. The next document was an email printout. Sophia's name sat at the top like a stain. She had written to someone with an address so strange it looked manufactured. The message was short, frantic, filled with phrases like, "The investment didn't go as planned, and I just need 2 more weeks." The kind of language used by people who were already drowning. Clayton leaned back slightly, watching my reaction. He said it was clear she had fallen into some kind of scam or debt, the sort that pulled reckless people deeper the more they struggled to escape. He explained her withdrawals could qualify as financial abuse within marriage, because the money belonged jointly to Gabriel, and because he had not consented, the law viewed it similarly to theft. The bank records alone were enough to open an investigation. His tone grew firmer as he listed the potential charges: unauthorized access, misappropriation, spousal financial misconduct. Each word settled in the air like a stone dropped into dark water. Then he looked at me with a seriousness that tightened my chest. He told me Sophia's behavior over the past month suggested desperation, and desperation often leads to attempts at controlling the assets of others, especially elderly family members. He advised me to gather every document I had, proving my ownership of the house, the title, the tax records, the mortgage release from years ago. He said if Sophia tried to claim I was unfit or mentally compromised, those papers would become my shield. I listened, hands folded in my lap, feeling the shape of the last weeks take clearer form. Sophia's push to get me to sign away rights, her interest in my medical appointments, her questions about my dizziness. None of it had been random. Clayton said this kind of pattern was common when someone planned to pursue conservatorship over an elder. They begin by creating evidence of instability. They push toward a crisis. They position themselves as the rescuer. I felt a long breath leave my body slow and heavy. Clayton placed the folder in front of me and told me to keep it hidden until the police requested it. His presence alone steadied the room, restoring the sense that I was no longer standing alone against something dark and sharp. As he left, he told me one final thing. Be ready. She's cornered, and people like her don't stop when they panic. They escalate. I nodded, holding the folder close, feeling the truth settle in my hands like weight and clarity both at once. Clayton listened without interrupting as I laid everything out piece by piece the way a chef plates a dish with intention in every movement. I placed my recipe notebook on the table between us and opened it to the pages filled over the last weeks. Lines of dates, times, short phrases, and descriptions filled the margins. I pointed to each entry, explaining what I heard, when Sophia whispered in the kitchen, the exact words that floated through the hallway when she thought I was outside watering the garden. I showed him the notes about the pot, the color of the soup, the changes in its thickness, the faint streaks of powder at the bottom. The pages were neat, but the truth inside them was messy, heavy, and real. Clayton read slowly, his eyes narrowing with each detail. When he looked up, I told him precisely how the powder smelled the bitter note sitting under the sweet pumpkin scent, the way it reminded me of herbal stimulants I had used decades ago. I explained the deeper shade of orange and the unusual weight of the soup when I stirred it. I described Sophia's physical behavior that afternoon, the way she hovered too close to the stove, the way she flinched every time I walked into the kitchen, the way her eyes followed every movement I made. Every one of those observations, he said, could be used as circumstantial evidence if they aligned with the lab's findings. He took out his legal pad and began writing quickly. The scratch of his pen echoed in the quiet house. Clayton said that if the hospital's toxicology report showed stimulants consistent with the powder from Sophia's cupboard, the case could escalate into second-degree poisoning. In many states, that meant 2 to 10 years in prison, depending on intent and medical outcome. His tone was calm, but the gravity of those words settled in my chest like a weight I could not shift. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Sophia had not understood the danger of what she handled, but the law would. Clayton kept taking notes as I spoke. I told him about her sudden sweetness, her forced affection, the questions she asked about my health, the timing of her calls, the way she checked the clock again and again. I told him how the powder in her jar matched the scent in the soup. I told him how she screamed accusations at me the moment Samuel collapsed, as if she already had the script memorized. He wrote every detail with a precision that matched my own notes. When I stopped speaking, he tapped his pen once, then looked directly at me. He said I needed to remain calm, completely calm. He said people like Sophia, when cornered, often invent counter-allegations. Claims of elder abuse, claims of harassment, claims of emotional harm, or even physical threats. He warned that if I confronted her directly, she might twist any small moment into something she could use to protect herself. He said the truth was already working in my favor, and that the worst thing I could do now was react out of anger. I nodded quietly. Anger was not what filled me. What filled me was clarity, the kind that comes when every hidden piece finally moves into place. Clayton closed the notebook gently and slid it back to me. "Keep this safe," he said. "This will matter." And I believed him. 2 days later, when the results finally arrived, the envelope felt heavier than paper should. The officer handed it to me with a tone that held both apology and certainty. I opened it at my kitchen table, the same table where everything had begun, and the words inside landed with the force of a truth too solid to deny. The State Forensic Laboratory had completed its analysis. The pumpkin soup contained a concentrated stimulant listed under the FDA's Substances of Concern, a compound known for elevating heart rate marked in red letters for its danger to individuals with underlying cardiac conditions. I set the page down and read it twice, letting each sentence sink past the surface of my calm. The report explained exactly what I already knew. In a person with a healthy heart, the substance would cause dizziness, brief disorientation, maybe a few minutes of weakness. But in someone like Samuel, someone whose electrical heart pathways were fragile, the same stimulant could trigger acute arrhythmia, sudden collapse, or temporary cardiac arrest. The conclusion was written in clinical language, but even clinical language carries judgment. The soup was unsafe. It was contaminated. It was dangerous by design. The pages continued, outlining the timeline. The approximate time the substance was introduced into the soup matched the hour when Sophia had been alone in my kitchen. The timestamp was supported not only by the temperature of the mixture, but by the small kitchen camera I had placed behind the cookbooks. The forensic team had reviewed the footage. It showed Sophia moving around the stove while I was away, lifting lids, stirring quickly, checking the hallway, then returning with a small jar she kept tucked in her apron pocket. The quiet betrayal recorded in plain view. The report did not belong to me alone. Copies had been sent directly to the police department and the district attorney's office. The moment the substance was identified as a hazardous stimulant, the case shifted classification. No longer a medical incident. No longer an accident. It was now treated as intentional food tampering with potential to cause serious harm. A criminal offense. I heard a soft knock on the door and looked up. 2 officers stood outside waiting. Their presence was confirmation that the report had already reached their desks. I opened the door and they stepped in with professionalism that felt both reassuring and heavy. They asked if I understood the findings. I said yes. My voice did not shake. They asked if I had any questions. I did not. What I did feel was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm breaks. The truth was no longer living only in my notes, my suspicions, or the quiet corners of my home. It was written now, stamped, sealed, and entered into evidence. It had become official. And somewhere in the house behind me, Sophia would soon learn that the story she tried to script had been taken out of her hands. The police station felt colder than it should have, all metal chairs and fluorescent lights humming above us. They had gathered us in a single room, seating each of us at the long table that stretched like a line between truth and the story Sophia was desperate to cling to. She sat across from me, her hands trembling so visibly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. The moment the detective entered, she launched into her performance. She pointed at me with the same frantic energy she had shown at the dinner table. She said she switched the bowls. She wanted to hurt my father. She said it in a high, breaking voice, as if volume could turn lies into facts. She repeated that I had always hated her, that I must have done something to the soup, that she had seen me reach across the table with intention. Every sentence came out faster than the last, a rush of words meant to fill every space where common sense might have lived. But her story cracked from the inside. Her voice was loud, but her eyes betrayed her. She could not look directly at the detective. When he asked her a simple question, she glanced at the walls at her knees at Gabriel, anywhere except the person searching for the truth in her face. Her breathing sped up whenever silence fell. Her shoulders twitched every time she tried to steady herself. Lies always weigh more than the people who tell them. The detective waited until she ran out of breath before leaning forward. His tone was calm, not accusing, but precise in the way that makes liars tremble. He asked her if you did not add anything to the soup. Why would switching bowls harm your father? The question hung in the room like a knife suspended on a thread. Sophia froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The logic she needed wasn't there. Her lie depended on danger, but she had just claimed there was none. Her silence spread across the room like a slow, widening stain. Gabriel stared at her. his confusion spilling into something deeper. The look in his eyes was one I had not seen in years, a look cracking open from the inside. He whispered, "Sophia, what are you saying?" She didn't answer. Her fingers dug into her palms. Her shoulders trembled. The detective repeated the question, this time more softly. If the soup was harmless, why would the bowls matter? Sophia blinked rapidly, her lips trembling as she tried to stitch together an explanation that did not exist. There was no explanation. I watched Gabriel as the realization began to settle in him. His gaze moved from her trembling hands to her shifting eyes to the folder of evidence lying on the table. He looked at his wife and saw, maybe for the first time, that her words did not match reality. Her accusations spun in circles. Her logic collapsed beneath its own weight. And in that quiet unraveling, the truth found its first opening. I placed the jar of powder on the metal table, setting it down gently so the sound carried just enough to draw every eye in the room. Beside it, I slid over the tablet that held the video from my neighbor's camera. The detectives leaned forward. Sophia stiffened, as if her spine had turned to glass. I kept my hands folded, calm, steady, letting the evidence speak before I did. The footage began with a quiet suburban evening. The neighbor's porch light cast a soft glow across the driveway. Then Sophia appeared in the frame. She looked around twice fast and nervous, checking both ends of the street. A delivery driver handed her a small brown package. She signed, then tucked the parcel into her coat with a movement too practiced to be innocent. Instead of walking to the front door immediately, she paused again, scanning the neighborhood before hurrying inside. The behavior spoke louder than any confession. The detective paused the video at the moment she hid the package. He turned the screen to face her. He asked in a level tone if this was her. For a moment, Sophia did not breathe. Sweat gathered along her hairline, then rolled down her cheek. She stared at the image of herself on the screen, as if hoping the person in the frame would vanish. Her lips parted, but no denial came out. Silence is its own kind of answer, and the room felt it. I pushed the jar slightly closer to the detective. This was the jar I found in her room days earlier. The crime lab had run it through chemical comparison. 98% match with the stimulant found in the pumpkin soup. The number printed in the report left no room for coincidence. The powder in the jar and the substance in Samuel's bowl had the same chemical fingerprint. The detective lifted the jar carefully, examining the seal and the residue clinging to the rim. He wrote something down, then looked at Sophia again. She did not look back. Clayton sat beside me, hands clasped, eyes sharp. When the detective finished reviewing the lab match, Clayton finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried through the room with the precision of a blade. He said that behavior like this demonstrated mens rea, the mental element of a crime, the awareness, the preparation, the intent. Without intent, an act can be called an accident. With intent, it becomes a felony. The words fell into the air like stones, dropping into still water. Sophia flinched. Her breath hitched. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked into nothing. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. The investigator clicked the video back to the beginning and played it again, slower this time. Every subtle motion, every furtive glance, every moment she hid what she bought. Each detail chipped away the last pieces of her defense. I watched her unravel in silence. Not with triumph, but with certainty. This was the truth she had tried to bury. This was the moment when the evidence finally stood taller than her lies, and no amount of trembling or tears could pull it back. When Samuel finally opened his eyes in the hospital room, the air shifted. The beeping monitors steadied, and the faint antiseptic scent of the ward wrapped around all of us like a reminder of how close he had come to slipping away. I stood near the foot of the bed, while Gabriel hovered by his father's shoulder, worry etched into every line of his face. Samuel blinked a few times, then focused on us with a clarity that startled me. His voice was raspy, but determined when he spoke my name. "I'm awake, and I need to tell you something about Sophia." Gabriel stiffened beside him as though bracing for impact. Samuel took a slow breath and said that Sophia had pressured him repeatedly into signing loan documents for her cosmetic investments. "She told me if I didn't sign, you would think I disrespected her." His voice trembled at the memory. "She said she would tell you I didn't value her place in the family. She used shame like a leash, pulling him into obligations he never agreed to freely." I could see the pain in his eyes as he admitted how afraid he had been of causing conflict between his son and his daughter-in-law. He continued, his voice steadier now that the truth had begun to spill out. He confessed that more than once, Sophia had taken his personal information without permission to file small loan applications through a private finance company. He said he discovered unfamiliar mail statements. He couldn't explain credit inquiries he never authorized. When he confronted her, she laughed it off, told him he was just confused, told him it was part of a business plan he had supposedly agreed to. The humiliation of being manipulated carved a deep crease in his expression. Then he mentioned something none of us expected. His ex-wife, Sophia's mother, had warned him long before the wedding. She told me Sophia always uses family as a shield to get what she wants. She said Sophia has a pattern. She bends people, then breaks them when they finally resist. The room seemed to tighten around us as those words settled. History, once vague and distant, now aligned with everything we were witnessing in real time. A nurse stepped in to check his vitals, but Samuel held up a hand, insisting he finish his statement before exhaustion overtook him. When the detective arrived minutes later, Samuel repeated everything with remarkable clarity. The threats, the forged loan applications, the emotional manipulation. Every sentence strengthened the timeline and intention already forming in the case file. The officer typed steadily as Samuel spoke his testimony, becoming official record. His words didn't just accuse Sophia. They revealed a pattern of financial abuse and coercive control that stretched far beyond the soup on the Thanksgiving table. They showed a consistency in her behavior, a deliberate way of using pressure, fear, and family loyalty to strip others of power. When Samuel finally leaned back against the pillow, spent but relieved, the detective closed the folder and said his statement would be added to the investigation immediately. As I watched Samuel's eyes close again, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not vengeance, just a deep confirmation that the truth was finally stepping into the light. The room felt smaller the moment the detective asked the final question. His voice was calm, steady, measured in that way trained officers use when they know the truth is already hanging by a thread. He looked directly at Sophia and said the words slowly, so there could be no misunderstanding. "Did you put anything into the soup?" The air stilled. Even the humming lights above us seemed to pause. Sophia's breath hitched, her shoulders lifted in one sharp motion, and then she broke. Her voice erupted into the room, raw and panicked, louder than anything she had said since the investigation began. "I only wanted her weak enough so we could manage the house." The words tore out of her like something she had been holding back for too long. It was not a slip. It was not confusion. It was confession. Pure and unfiltered. The kind that could never be walked back. The recording device on the table captured every word under full compliance with Miranda procedures. Her admission now stood as evidence strong enough to hold its own in court. No need for guessing. No need for interpretation. Sophia's breakdown intensified. She slammed her hands on the table, sobbing so hard her sentences tangled into each other. She said everything had gone too far, that she only meant to scare me, that she never expected things to fall apart like this. Her lack of self-control made it worse. Without a lawyer beside her, she fell into the oldest trap there is. She kept talking, and every word she spoke carved a deeper mark into the case against her. Across the table, Gabriel collapsed inward, shoulders hunched, face drained of all color. He looked at his wife as if he had never seen her before. His voice cracked when he whispered that he could not understand how she could do this to his mother. His hands trembled. He tried to steady himself by gripping the edge of the chair, but nothing held. His world had shifted in a single breath, and the betrayal carved straight through him. The detective maintained a professional calm, writing each detail into the formal record. His pen moved across the page as steadily as if this were any other interview, though everyone in the room felt the gravity of what had just unfolded. When he finished, he read the final line out loud for accuracy. Motive identified. Asset acquisition. Property control. Financial authority. Conduct deliberate and premeditated. The words were cold, clinical, and precise. They placed Sophia exactly where her own confession had led her. She pressed her shaking hands to her face, still sobbing, but the truth was already fixed in place. The room no longer held uncertainty. It held resolution. The confession had closed the last open door in the investigation. I sat still, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply steady. Sophia had finally spoken the truth, and once spoken, it could not be taken back. The consequences did not arrive with noise. They arrived with paperwork, signatures, formal charges, and the kind of silence that follows a truth no one can outrun. When the arrest warrant was issued, the air in the police station shifted. Sophia sat motionless as the officers listed the charges. Intentional food poisoning, possession of a harmful stimulant, financial fraud. Each charge was read slowly, and each one landed like another door closing behind her. She did not speak. She only stared at the table shoulders, shaking, her world collapsing under the weight she had created for herself. Jail time was no longer a threat. It was an outcome waiting for the judge's pen. Gabriel stood near this doorway, unable to lift his head at first. When the officers led Sophia away, he covered his face with both hands. His breath broke into uneven fragments. He had believed in her for years. He had defended her, protected her, excused her, even when the signs were clear. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were red. He stepped toward me like someone walking through water, heavy and slow. He said he was sorry, and the words trembled out of him in pieces. Sorry for not seeing. Sorry for not listening. Sorry for letting her get close enough to harm me. His tears did not bring bitterness, only sadness. A sadness for the years he had lost to someone who loved only power. Samuel, still recovering, made his decision with the quiet resolve of a man who had survived too much to tolerate betrayal any longer. He said he would have no contact with his daughter until she accepted responsibility for her actions. There was no anger in him, only a line drawn with finality, a boundary built from years of tolerating manipulation he should never have endured. His refusal to excuse her this time became its own kind of justice. Clayton worked quickly in the days following the confession. He filed protective orders, verified the deed to my home, secured my financial accounts, and documented every piece of evidence that tied back to Sophia's attempts to undermine my stability. When the final packet came back stamped and approved, he placed the folder in my hands and told me I was legally shielded from every angle. For the first time in weeks, I felt a breath move freely through my chest. My home was safe. My savings was secure. My life was once again my own. And the neighborhood, the people who had known me for years, responded in a way I never expected. They brought meals, flowers, notes tucked under my door. They spoke softly but firmly, telling me they believed me, that they always trusted my character, that they had seen enough small signs from Sophia to suspect something was wrong. Their support wrapped around me with a warmth deeper than any apology or legal document. My reputation, once threatened by lies whispered in my own house, returned to me fully. Sophia faced the weight of her actions. I faced the steady return of my dignity, and in that balance, karma completed its quiet circle. Winter light pressed gently through my kitchen windows the afternoon I baked pumpkin bread again. This time the scent was soft and warm, untouched by fear, untouched by suspicion. Just pumpkin, cinnamon, a little brown sugar, and the quiet peace of a house finally returned to itself. I folded the batter slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of the wooden spoon against the bowl. No secrets, no tension, only the comfort of something honest in my hands. When the loaf went into the oven, the heat rose and wrapped around me like an old friend I had almost forgotten. Gabriel arrived just as the timer chimed. He carried a small toolbox, though he barely needed it. He said he was here to fix the fence again. I knew it was just an excuse to stay close. He walked around the kitchen, touching the counter, glancing at the cooling rack, taking in the familiar smells as if returning to a memory he thought he had lost. When he finally sat down, he looked at me with eyes softer than they had been in years. He told me he wished he had protected me sooner. His voice didn't break, but there was a tremor beneath it, the kind that belongs to someone still learning how to forgive himself. I put a plate of warm slices between us, and we sat quietly, letting the moment settle without forcing it to become anything more. Later, when the house grew still again, I opened my notebook. Not the recipe book I had used to track danger, but the journal where I kept my thoughts as a woman who had lived long enough to understand patterns. I wrote that aging is not weakness. Aging is the ability to smell danger in your own kitchen. It is the instinct honed through years of survival, the intuition that saves you even when the world doubts you. The pen moved slowly across the page, each word grounding me a little more in the life I had fought to keep. As evening settled, I ladled a bowl of pumpkin soup. Real pumpkin this time, bright and steaming, the kind of soup my husband used to request on cold nights. I held the bowl between my palms and let the warmth sink into my skin. I whispered to myself, "Thanksgiving this year, I am thankful for the truth." Not for the storm that came before it, but for the clarity it brought after it passed. Outside, the wind pushed lightly against the windows. Inside, my kitchen felt safe enough to breathe in fully again. I tasted the soup slow and steady and let its warmth fill the space the fear had once occupied. And then as I set the bowl down, a thought rose quietly in my mind. A question without an answer. Does justice make people happier, or does it simply allow them to breathe deeply again?